Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Set Listing Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson. We're doing another timey-wimey episode, which always makes me happy. It is my morning, it is my guest afternoon. I am drinking coffee. I do not know if he has an afternoon cocktail or not.
I wish.
Jay, welcome to the podcast.
Pleasure to be here.
Tell us a little about yourself.
What can I tell you? I'm 60 this year. I've been following Bruce and his work since I was about 12 or 13, a lifetime of it being the soundtrack to my triumphs and disasters, which has been a great experience. These days, I work in theatre. I'm one of those quite rare but niche creatures, a showbiz Jew. There aren't many of them left, but that's
It is the underserved minority, isn't it?
yeah, I know. So I work in theatre. My daughters work in theatre, and I've just finished working on a big musical. I don't know if it's even been heard of in the States, called Only Fools and Horses. Right now, I've just taken on a new job running an outdoor Shakespeare theatre called Tolthorpe, and so I'm about to spend the next 5 years or so of my life working on outdoor Shakespeare, which is one of my along with Bruce, one of my very first loves. About the same point in my life, I started getting involved in theatre like that. So that's
And
where I'm at. I'm in the middle of my doctorate at the moment.
oh wow.
Yeah, I've got about 60,000 words to go. I'm 40,000 words in. Yeah, that features a bit of Bruce as well, of course.
Yeah.
But that's me. That's me at the moment.
What do you do for the theater? What's the gig?
What's the gig? I'm the manager. I,
Oh, okay.
I run the gaff. I run the place. Yeah, that's what I do.
I will tell you something must be going on because I opened up Google and typed in only fools and it filled out at horses.
Yeah, it's a staging of a huge 1980s sitcom
Yeah.
television, and it's made onto the stage. I should say the two gigs I did before that may resonate a bit more for an American audience. I was the assistant director and managed a show called The Commitments.
Okay.
It's a big film about soul music.
Yeah, I remember liking the film a lot.
Yeah, so it was a staging of the show. It was a 2022, 2023. We were out on the road with
Hmm.
that, and we were touring it all around the UK. And there was a wonderful bit of overlap because I think Bruce came out with Only the Strong Survive. Some of the tracks on that album were in the show, and
Hmm.
I had fantasies of getting each party to hear the other, which I think
Yeah.
Bruce. That's one of the common Bruce fantasies, isn't it? What would Bruce
Yeah,
do? And
exactly.
that was a lovely little overlap. And then the gig before that, I was on the same jobs on We Will Rock You for Brian May and Roger Taylor. I've been
Uh,
on the fringes of rock and roll and soul music for years, so it's lovely.
so talk about it, Jay. Where did you grow up and was music a big part of your family's household?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up for the first 3 or 4 years of my life in London, northwest London. And then my parents did what all good immigrants do when they get on, they moved out to the suburbs and bought a big house. But my father was a jazz musician. Um,
Okay.
and my mother was an actor, but my father was a jazz musician. And so that manifested itself in a complete and absolute ban on rock and roll music in the house.
Mm.
It was jazz music. And so that was interesting because I didn't hear pop music and rock and roll through those very early years. The first experience I had was via a cousin, I think, she had the first ABBA album. And I think she only was allowed it because her dad fancied the blonde one. I
President?
remember hearing a
Yes.
bit of that. And she had a single of a band called Sweet, and they had a big single called Ballroom Blitz. This would be about 75.
Sure, I remember that.
It's a great glam rock single. And I remember
Yeah.
hearing sirens at the start and a really sugary, catchy chorus, and I loved it. And then for some reason, I think my dad accidentally bought into the house a single by a model called Twiggy,
Hmm.
who couldn't sing, but she
Yeah.
did this single, and I loved it. And it was pop music. And I was like, "Oh my god, what is this?" I must have played it again and again, and I think it set alarm bells off because I remember being told the cleaning lady had run it over with the vacuum cleaner, and it's gone. And of course, I don't think it had been. I think it was just exterminated by my parents. So there was a battle going on already at this point. I was like, oh, I like this. And my father wasn't keen at all. But my dad, he was also a DJ. He was one of the very first people to play Copacabana by Barry Manilow on BBC Radio. I
He
can't
did he think that was jazz?
know, but he thought it was close enough to show music and show tunes
Okay.
and something that he could recognize from the Great American Songbook that I could get away with it. We had a little bit of common ground there, and he bought me the sheet music for Manilow Magic, which was like the best of Barry Manilow. Could it be Magic and Mandy and all that stuff?
Yeah.
So I learned to play the piano to that. I could play all that on the piano, and then I started to feed him. Could you get me this title? Could we get me that title when you're out? And against all his better judgment, he bought me. This would be 77, 78, I think. Bat Out of Hell by Meatloaf.
Okay.
I didn't know that Roy was on it, and I didn't know that Max was on it, of course, because I
Yeah.
wasn't into Bruce yet. But I did know that it could be played on the piano, and it could be played really well on the piano, and it was obviously written on the piano. I hammered away at those keys till my fingers bled, and my parents slammed the door and said, "What is this rubbish?" And then it culminated in a moment of explosion when I was about 14, 15, and I'd been sent. My uncle lived in a small called Bognor Regis, and it had a royal title, Regis, because I think one of the kings had gone there to die or something. But it was an absolute terrible place. Anyway, my uncle lived down there where he ran a series of confectionery concessions. He had a Mercedes convertible and an 8-track cassette in the front, and he used to play music, again, pop music, and it addicted me. Donna Summer and also Elton John's greatest hits. And he took me home one day and we killed a bit of time, and he said, "I'll put a record on for you." And he put on Born to Run. And it was like the world went from monochrome to technicolor.
The world, the Wizard of Oz, right? Where he wakes up and it's in color. Kansas is black and white. Yeah.
The scales fell from my eyes, and looking back,
Mhm.
I'm not sure why, because what was it about hearing Born to Run that a sort of 13-year-old kid in England was getting from it? I don't know. But it was the sound of the whole thing sounded like possibility, I think. Sounded like there was something exciting around the corner. And I was by this point I was learning the saxophone, which an instrument I attained utter mediocrity on. And really, I thought I was an alto sax. My father had bought it in an attempt to keep me on the righteous path. My response, of course, at this point now was to learn all those Clarence Clemens solos.
Yeah.
But I'd get my father to transcribe them, and he was like, "You want me to transcribe this? It's 5 notes. What are you talking about?" So I would do it. And then I think the grand culmination where he gave up, by this point, I had brothers following who were playing things as well. But by this point, we listened to Clarence Clemens had that album, the Red Bank Rockers album, the first one,
Yeah.
which was really good. That was a cracking R&B album, and I thought maybe we can find common ground on this. But
Yeah.
my dad, he was ill by this point, and he was crabby, and I wasn't terribly sympathetic, I suspect. But I asked him to transcribe the solo from Resurrection Shuffle, and he said, and I quote, and it always remember, "This is moron music. This is music for people who are idiots." And it's got 4 chords or 3 chords and what a half
Yeah.
whip. And I said,
Wow.
I just want to play this. I just want to play it. And that started the great divergence that occurred between us, I think, over music, you know.
So I'm a little curious because, by the way, similar experience. I am 5 years older than you.
Looking
And
very well on it.
well,
Looking very well.
thank you so much, sir. I appreciate you look wonderful as well. And so I grew up in a house that played, as the Blues Brothers joked, both kinds of music, country and western. And I remember I was visiting my cousins in Ohio, where my dad's parents lived, and they were shocked I could not name all four Beatles. This would have been in 68, 69. It They were just, how can you not? I'm like,
Mm.
I'm in a house listening to Merle Haggard and Hank Williams and Conway Twitty and Loretta Lynn and
But I bet in time, though, that probably served you really well. And you
right.
could probably go back and see it as great stuff. But I've never gone back to jazz and gone, this is for me. At least you had the foundations of rock and roll there.
And that's was my question, and you answered it, and I love it. I find two kinds of people as I discuss this: the people that loved their parents' music growing up, they liked it, but as they reached a teenager and young adult, they just expanded their horizon. And the others who couldn't really stand their parents' music. And then when they're 30, they go, wow, that Johnny Cash guy dad liked, he's pretty good.
Yeah, you see, I never
So
liked the
you,
jazz, but
yes,
I did, and I do. I earn my living doing show tunes. I've directed and produced musicals and written them, and the stage musical has been something that I, probably since my dad died more than anything, have found at least a common theme
yeah,
that I can identify through my culture and through the way I grew up. But I think what's interesting as well, and you hinted at it, that when you grow up in these ways, where you get a strange entry point into an art
yeah,
form, you miss out on some of the foundational stuff. So I've never been into the Beatles, and I
yeah,
had to get into the Stones in my 20s.
yeah,
So what underpinned this stuff I loved, you do a reverse into the history. You don't do it chronologically. And I suppose that's part of the fun of something like Springsteen's work is that you're forever picking up clues to byways and paths that you haven't been down, and the music. I mean, I Bruce talked recently about I think the romance of the one-off hit single, and he talked about Jungle Rock by Hank Mizell. Now he mentioned that about 20 years, 30 years, 40 years ago, I think, because I remember him steering me towards Jungle Rock by Hank Mizell, which is a dreadful piece of music. In
okay,
the yeah, I mean it's a terrible piece of what is it, rockabilly schlock. He steered me towards that in the 80s, and I remember listening to it and thinking, well, this is interesting. You get these strange, it's almost, I hesitate to say postmodern, but it feels like it's so out of order and it's so out of continuity that you just get these random satellites orbiting around you when you're into something like Bruce. And I'm guessing that Dylan fans probably feel the same, though musically, I don't know quite how it works.
yeah. I certainly have gone back and listened to the Beatles hits and love them. Really have never done a deep dive on Dylan or the Stones or Led Zeppelin, any of that. My first experience of controlling my own music was an AM clock radio, right? So
Yeah.
I could turn it to the local rock station and listen. So I grew up, I graduated high school in 77. So I grew up listening to AM rock, everything from Queen to Barry Manilow to Barry White to
Mm.
Foreigner and Heart and all these people. And then you made me smile because for Christmas one year, I got a little green portable 8-track player. There was only one speaker, and you
Yeah.
plugged in. And the first 8-track I ever bought with my own money was Elton John's Greatest Hits.
You see that album, which I bought that recently for, I don't know, the third or fourth time, must be
Yeah,
on vinyl. And
yeah,
on vinyl, when you listen to it on a decent set of speakers, you think, yeah, the greatest hits stand up. They're good tunes and they're well recorded. I don't know if
yeah,
the albums, Elton's albums, have got the same
yeah,
longevity, but that first time you take control of your own listening, that
yeah,
and it, again, you talk about Christmas. It was a birthday for me because I don't know if you had this thing over the pond, but we used to have this thing called book tokens. So you'd be bought a card and it had a book token inside. You could spend 10 quid on a book. But there was a wrinkle to the whole process, which is that if you went to one particular shop, which was called WH Smith's, which is funnily enough about to go out of business now, they were all over the country, they still are. They sold what we called then records as well as books. So you could tell your aunt that you were going to get a book, go to WH Smith's, and you could come back with vinyl. And
yeah,
the first two albums, I bought Parallel Lines by Blondie,
yeah,
which what a wonderful album. And I seem to recall, I can't remember, it's either an Electric Light Orchestra album, which has not weathered well, or I like to think maybe I was cool enough to buy London Calling by The Clash, but I suspect that was a slightly later purchase.
yeah,
But at that moment, you take control. you bring your own music home and you put it on the record player and you drop the needle. That's a great moment because you can keep doing it. You can keep playing it, and
Yeah.
suddenly that's the highway you're on. You're not getting off that horse.
No, and in fact, I saw Electric Light Orchestra back in the 70s.
Wow.
They were in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. We went and saw them. And then just recently, late last year, my best friend, one of my good friends and I went to see Jeff Lynne's kind of closing tour,
Yeah.
and it was a lot of fun.
He's a clever man, isn't he? He's a very clever fellow. And
Yeah,
he was part of the whole traveling Wilburys thing, wasn't he?
exactly.
And you've got to give him credit for that. But I
Yeah.
suspect there's some great pop songs, aren't there?
Yeah, and I think, yeah, that's it. And once again, I have a softness because I remember buying a New World via Columbia Record House.
Like a record club you
Yeah,
join.
and I remember getting that in an 8-track and loving Telephone Line. And
Mm.
then I was so embarrassed in a fun way. Multiple years ago, I had a guy who's doing an ELO podcast on the as my guest. And I told him that one of my favorite songs was Rockaria. And he yes, and I just recently learned it's actually Rock Aria, not Rockaria.
You've hit upon something that's really important for. I'm going to say two things actually,
Yeah.
not to do with this. One is when you mentioned the Beatles and going back to their catalogue, I've always struggled with it, but I did get into it through Wilson Pickett's cover of Hey Jude. Don't know if you've ever heard it.
Yeah.
Wilson Pickett covering the Hey Jude with the Allman Brothers on guitar is mind blowing. Anyway,
Yeah.
mind blowing. But to go back to mishearing titles, of course, to an English ear, and certainly until you got hold of the stuff or you listened to it, most of what Bruce Springsteen sung about was a linguistic shit show. You hadn't got a clue.
Yeah.
You were guessing at things. And I remember the first time I went to the States when I was 21, getting my camera out as I left the airport and I saw an Exxon sign.
You're like,
Yeah. And I
oh,
didn't realize it was just a normal petrol station, a normal
yeah.
gas station. And there were hundreds and thousands of them. So everything Bruce sung about, even to this day, there are lines I hear as one thing, and I'm sure we all do it. They get fixed in your head, and then you look at the lyric sheet, and it's like he's not talking about that. He's talking about something completely different. Particularly the Wild, the Willing, and the E Street Shuffle, which never had a lyric sheet over here. And
Yeah.
so even now, I can't think of examples, but I know that there are lines in Girls in Their Summer Clothes, which I love. It's a great piece of work, and there are lines in it which I'm sure I'm mishearing. The Union saved my life. I don't think that's the right line. Yeah, but that's part of the fun with Bruce. It's a little bit like Dylan, where language is a kind of Joycean roulette. You never quite know what order it's going to come up in. But to English ears, it still is a bit of a foreign dialect.
Yeah. And every once in a while, I will still find, I will hear a lyric and go, oh, really? That what it means? I
Yeah,
found it a little funny. There was a lot of people, a bunch of us old fogies, posting the Kendall Lamar Super Bowl show. That was horrible. Couldn't understand anything he said. And I
yeah.
laughed because for the longest time, my wife just, I don't understand one thing Bruce is saying. How can you even listen to it?
I
Right?
know.
Yeah. So what I did to her is I said, okay, what I want you to do is, do you remember back in elementary school, we would listen to Peter and the Wolf, and the teacher would explain to you that this is a story and each instrument is a different animal. I said, so I want you to think of his voice as just another instrument. So don't try to hear the words, just feel the emotion of the song. And that was her gateway.
Yeah,
Like
it's about
that
gateway.
made sense. Then she would Google lyrics and read along as he sings. But so yeah, they're all, and Penn Jillette from Penn and Teller always he says that nothing makes him more frustrated is when he hears a teenager talk about loving classic rock. And he goes, no, rock and roll is music your parents can't stand. Every generation should have their music that your parents look at and go, "This is rubbish."
Yeah, absolutely. It's what it's there for. I
It
mean,
is.
God, so many things I need to say in reply. First was, I don't think I ever really understood Kitty's Back until I
Right.
saw it on tour in 2023. Then I got a bit more of it. I could hear what he was saying because these days, of course, he slows everything down. The great unmentionable truth is that the E Street Band are playing at three-quarter pace. It's slowed down now, which is fine. But so I heard it then. I think the other thing that is lovely about Bruce, in almost everything he does, there is this duality. You can put your finger on it everywhere, but certainly lyrically, at one hand, he's quoting from Tennyson. I think
Yeah.
he's the only man I know who's taken song titles from Ulysses by Tennyson. Two song titles come out of it, don't they?
Yeah.
And then I remember even the first time I heard it, there's a couple of lines. There's a line in Nebraska which is a straight lift from, I think it's Our Mutual Friend by Dickens. So there's an incredible literariness to his work at the same time as this cornball slang, a street slang of the early stuff. And it's that combination of the high art and the low art that actually
Hmm.
finds its way into the best of his work that I think is almost unique. And I love that. But going back to what you're saying about music your parents hate, is he the first major artist to be passed down the generations? Because I see so many people, and I'm so fortunate in this respect. My own daughters are as sick with the Bruce illness as I am.
Yeah.
And I've learned consequently so much music through them from that route. But is he the first major artist that really is friendly about crossing the generations? Certainly in Europe, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you was there's such a big difference, I think, between the North American audiences and the European audiences, which are the European audiences go from 5 and 6 years old up to 80. And they
Yeah.
are, yeah, most people are 50 something, 60 something white men, but there's a good 30–40% who are not. And I think demographically, there's something quite unique going on there. I guess at recent Stones concerts, there were a few dads taking their lads, but I
Yeah.
think Bruce is unique at the moment in terms of just he's almost become the family entertainer.
Yeah. It is one of the things that I'm always impressed with is when I have one of the questions I ask, and you've answered it, is can you remember when you first discovered Bruce and what about him spoke to you? I have a second generation Springsteen fan. That's like asking, when did you learn your parents bought a certain brand of tea or washing powder, right? It's just always in your life. So there isn't that moment because you grew up with Bruce on the speaker. And I can't tell you how many kids, now adults, talk about that they were dancing to Born in the USA or Dancing
Yeah.
in the Dark or Born to Run as they were a kid.
I think also because as Bruce parents, let's sort of call us that, we're
Yeah.
probably a little bit obsessive, just
Yeah.
slightly obsessive. And I've been gently complained at by partners and daughters that actually you don't play much else. But then the effect of that is that most people come around to it and most people learn to love it. And I remember one of my daughters, I can't remember which one, coming down mid teenage years, and she'd been up in her bedroom and she just said, Dad, I've been listening to Nebraska. I get it. And I just thought, wow, that's a heavy thing to have landed in your teenage years. But it's the result, I suspect, of me being fairly monotheistic in my musical beliefs.
Yeah. My son certainly found his own music, but he used to call them the beach bags. I still am a huge Brian Wilson and Beach Boy
Yeah.
fan. I discovered them in 77.
Yeah.
Talk about something, and then did a deep dive in the music. So I didn't know that music that they were doing in the late 60s when that American audience wasn't enjoying it. I just was like, wow, this is interesting. And I love this different music.
Can I ask you then?
Sure.
I've not met many Beach Boys fans over here. There are a few. But
Yeah.
as a Beach Boys sort of disciple, What did you make of the Magic Working in a Dream stuff that was so beautifully vocally arranged? Because to me, a non-Beach Boys fan who knew a little bit about them, it sent me off to listening to Surfs Up and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But and Pet Sounds, of course. But what did you make of it?
Well,
Bruce doing?
yeah. So when Magic came out and Girls in Their Summer Clothes, I made the joke that it's a grown-up Brian Wilson song. It's a Beach Boy song that I just, adored. I just loved it so much. And then there's a couple of songs on Working on a Dream that have a very strong that late 60s Brian Wilson stuff like he did for Smile and everything. So I'll tell you a fun story, Jay. A couple years ago, it must have been before the pandemic, Brian Wilson was touring and they reported that he played there in New Jersey and Bruce showed up and got on stage for the encore. And he played guitar and sang on a couple of songs. And I said, no offense meant to my son. I hope to be at his wedding one day. I hope to see grandchildren. My wife and I have hit 40 years anniversary, 45. But if I could have been in the stage and seen Bruce Springsteen and Brian Wilson performing together, the Lord could take me. Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
this is it. My two musical obsessions. My latest is Jason Isbell. I'm just adoring his music. I think he's so brilliant. A lot of Pearl Jam fans will love when Eddie and Bruce get together and stuff. So my hope is that somehow or another Bruce ends up just on stage with Jason or Jason's on stage with him just once.
It's a natural alliance, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because Isabel's stuff is wonderful, and he's got a real following over here. And it's the same with Zach Bryan. My
Yeah.
youngest daughter introduced me to Zach Bryan, and you can see exactly why they did Sandpaper and exactly why there's a natural kind of crossover. And maybe one of his real legacies, Springsteen, as he's in the sort of early winter of his career, maybe one of his great legacies is that he has left behind a whole slew of really good songwriters working
Yeah.
in that American tradition.
Yeah, Brian Koppelman, who did Billions and other TV shows, was doing a podcast and he had Jason on and he said, I think you're the best songwriter under 50 currently. And of course, Jason, that's sweet of you to say and everything. And I think that's always hard to say because is there really the best? Is there really ever the first? But I do think he is damn good.
He is.
Yeah, he's just really good.
Yeah.
So, thank you for that. I loved going on that tangent. So you got to hear, did you then going back, once you heard Bruce, did you start doing a deep dive?
I went back and I can remember the format that I bought the albums on, which was very important. I bought Asbury Park, I think the next year, and I bought it on cassette. And Lost in the Flood was clearly the middle track, and they faded Lost in the Flood out at the end of side one. You turn the cassette over, and it faded back in on side two, which even then you could tell was an act of terrible corporate vandalism.
Yeah.
But Asbury Park was another sort of explosion because it was very different, and I wasn't sure what I was hearing. I didn't know anything about folk music, and I didn't know really
Hmm.
anything about acoustic music. And even then, without knowing the real details of it, I could hear this was a different band. This, to my ears, sounded like music that wasn't just white rock and roll. So there was something
Yeah.
interesting going on here. And I had a fellow friend called Tim, who's, I'm proud to say, still one of my very closest friends. And Tim and I went on this journey together where we listened to stuff. And his favorite album remains The Wild, the Willing, and the E Street Shuffle. And we had it on vinyl. And in fact, Wild Billy's Circus Story, which is slightly obtuse and one of the
Yeah.
few songs that I can play on the guitar. He is his favorite song, but we used to go fishing, Tim and we used to go fishing in the dead of winter. And of all the most inappropriate and weird places to hear Bruce songs, we used to hang a little cassette player from the roof of the tent and listen to Wild the Willing and the E Street Shuffle in the freezing December weather while we were waiting for fish that didn't appear. I got into that, and then I was off and running. The first three albums, Darkness was I didn't quite get it. The older you get, the more darkness means to you,
Yeah.
because the lives of quiet desperation that most men lead, as Emerson said, that's darkness. It's a sustained essay in desolation, and you've got to
Yeah.
go through come off the rails a few times to really get that one. I remember
I,
buying
yeah.
The River in the shops. I bought The River in the shops, and I was confused because I thought, is this live? It feels live. There's people
Yeah.
shouting. It's messy. Now I understand the garage aesthetic. But the first kind of really big kind of handbrake stop was Nebraska. I remember buying Nebraska in the shops and coming home and putting it on, and what the fuck is this? And it was mind blowing. And now, of course, we look back and we think there's a slightly voyeuristic sense, isn't there, when you hear
Yeah.
Nebraska now? You're
Well,
hearing somebody's breakdown, and that wonderful book by Warren Zanes.
I was so pleased that he joined me on the podcast. He did all the Springsteen shows, but I just loved visiting with him. The story I've told multiple times is, as I was sharing with you, 1977, I buy the Beach Boys' Endless Summer on 8-track, this collection, a lot of their summer hits, and I
Mm.
fell in love with it. And so I'm going through buying just anything I could find. And when I got Pet Sounds, I didn't know what the hell is this. There's instrumentals. Why are we, this is a rock album. Why are there instrumentals? I don't understand this at all. And now, push comes to shove, I would probably list Pet Sounds as my favorite album,
Yeah,
going above even Bruce albums. It
yeah, because
just,
you've got a combination there of something that landed when you were still an emotionally forming individual. At the
yeah,
same time, the work itself is pushing boundaries, is slightly form shifting, shape shifting, and
yeah,
I think Nebraska did that. I think I can remember buying Born in the USA. I bought the single. Tim and I had flipped the single and listened to Pink Cadillac first.
yeah,
We're gonna fetishize it and save it. And we listened
yeah,
to Pink Cadillac and we're like, wow, we recognize this. It's rockabilly. We get it. And then
yeah,
we flipped it and we listened to Dancing in the Dark and we thought, hey, is he still singing? It was so different. And now I love what they do with it in concert. But then you heard it. It was something you'd never imagine Bruce doing.
yeah,
And I was slightly relieved when I bought the album a few weeks later. And my other great Bruce friend, Josephine, came round and we played side two first. And that 1-2 punch of No Surrender and Bobby Jean, we were so
yeah,
relieved because there
yeah.
he was.
Okay.
He sounds like it's supposed to sound.
Yeah, there's my old friend Bruce.
But now you listen to Dancing in the Dark, and it's become. Is it the same in the States? It's become a cheesy pop hit over here. Everybody loves it. Everyone knows Dancing in the Dark. It's the song you can do the housework to, which is what
Yeah.
he always wanted it to be.
Which is what I think is fascinating sometimes is you hear people covering it and taking it into a different way.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Couple, and because it's actually, if you read the lyrics, it's a pretty strong song.
Yeah.
It's telling something. And there was, I wish I could remember the guys, but there were a duo that took Dancing in the Dark and I Want to Dance with Somebody and merged them into kind of a thing. And it's hilarious. It's beautiful
Yeah.
that this togetherness.
Do you know the cover by Hot Chip of Dancing in the Dark?
Yeah.
I think that's wonderful. It's great.
Yeah.
Great. But like you say, the lyric remains the lyric of a slightly grumpy, depressive
Yeah.
being lovely. It's a really beautiful thing. But it was Born in the USA, of course, over here that took him. He'd been a cult artist till then. You'd never really hear Bruce on
Right.
the radio. There was one DJ called Roger Scott, who died last year, who'd play him on Capital Radio, and it was mainly Santa Claus is Coming to Town at Christmas. But
Yeah.
nobody really played much Bruce at all. You had to hover by I remember videoing a show called the Old Grey Whistle Test, which had an interview with him. And it was the first footage we'd seen and the first live snippet we'd seen. We'd
Yeah.
never seen him before. And it was the Born in the USA tour, the American opening legs, they did a bit of 20-minute feature on it. And they also featured a bit from the Detroit medley at the end of it. And they did a bit of Course to Three from No Nukes. And it was again, that was another earth-shattering moment. This is what he looks like. We knew what he sounded like. Hey, this is
Yeah.
what he looks like. This is how he dresses. And then, of course, we all queued up and sent off our money for our tickets for Born in the USA tour. And I went to see him for the first time in Newcastle in 1985 in June on my own. I traveled to
Hmm.
the other end of the country on a train on my own and queued up and got in the first three rows. And I remember it was because, of course, in Europe, we don't have seats on the floor. We're
Yeah.
just displaying massive bodies. And I was 19, 18, 19, so that was just fine by me. And then they stood us all up near a showtime, and I'd been there for 9 hours, I think. And I was second row in the middle, and he came on. I will never forget in the yellow and maroon polo shirt. I've never managed to find one. His black leather jacket, and he went into the 2, 3, 4, and into the USA, and then Badlands. I don't think I was able to express or compute what I was seeing until about the end of Out in the Street, the third song. I was just electricity going through my body was at such a high rate that this changed everything. This was the great framing of that energy that first started when I heard Born to Run in all the Thunder Road, the opening Thunder Road, and my uncle's bedroom all those years ago. This is where we ended up. And
Yeah.
then, I saw the rest of the tour and here we are now.
So I always like to preface this with the amount of times you've seen Bruce perform live is not a fair barometer of how big a fan you are. It just there are
No,
people. Are you someone who counts? And if so, how many?
I've lost count, heading towards 100, I think.
Okay.
But all right, I have to tell you, and this may be heresy, the more I've enjoyed the solo performances and the less
Yeah.
I've gone for the E Street stuff. Listen, the E Street stuff is great.
Yeah.
I took my youngest daughter to see him in Toronto before Christmas, and she'd not seen him before, and it was great. It was fantastic. It was
Sure.
fabulous. But seeing Bruce with the band is about bringing other people to see it and sharing that moment as much as hearing Badlands for the 40,000th time.
Other people have shared that same thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
now I went to see him on Broadway a few times. I've loved the Devil and the Tom and Joad tours
Yeah.
immensely. They for me, and I think probably as he's moved, as he's one of us has moved away from rock and roll, or maybe me, I don't know. But I do think now, for me, you talk about your favorite album, his crowning glory, I think, is in fact the Born to Run audiobook.
It is a
Extraordinary,
wonderful book, isn't it? And
extraordinary.
yes, and I've listened to it a couple of times. So I'm going to ask you about Western Stars in a minute, but if you could put your stage manager
Mhm.
show business from the professional side of it, tell
Yeah.
me your thought on Springsteen's on Broadway. Because as a fan, I absolutely adored it. I got to see it once live. I've watched it on Netflix 3 or 4 times.
I thought it
Yeah,
was an outstanding work of. I think the bravery was again it had that duality, the
yeah,
extraordinary bravery of I'm going to talk about my trauma in public as a way of healing myself and you, but at the
mhm,
same time saying, listen, folks, this is just work, this is just a magic trick, this is just sleight of hand,
yeah,
and don't be fooled. But
mhm.
then inviting you to be fooled, and of course everybody was fooled. And I think that's what my PhD is about: the nature of authenticity in performance.
Tell me a
Well,
little more about that.
I just really, it came out of seeing it on Broadway and working on this idea of if you look back now at Springsteen's career, and a lot of those early criticisms are this guy is not real, this guy is an amalgam of loads of influences, like everybody
Yeah,
else isn't. But
exactly. Yeah,
he was forever playing with creating a persona and creating a stage presence in the way that Dylan set the mold.
yeah,
But you can see Bruce arrive at the need to do it through a series of childhood traumas, and then the need to do it through a series of sort of exponential leaps in the size of his career and the way he protects his image. And the USA left him with a few scars, and he deconstructs it to ton. I think Bono, who I haven't got a lot of time for, has a great phrase that he talks about: our master was not falling, he was falling in love, and he deconstructs his own image. And I think that's a very clever way of doing it. It may all be about to be refigured, I think, with this potential release of these 90s albums that we keep getting teased with.
Yeah.
But the quiet decade probably saved his life. You
Yeah.
know, it let him just get on with raising the kids and learning how to cook pancakes and not being a musician who got up at midday and went to strip bars. Then I think
Yeah.
that for me, the second act of Bruce's career post Rising, I return to much, much more now. The great thing is the work's grown at the same age I have for me. And so
Mhm.
I've much more likely to return to, excuse me, magic, or I love working on a dream. I know not everyone does. The later albums for me, I'm not saying Hot and The Song Survive, but even Letter to You, I think is a fabulous late career statement.
Oh,
So,
I absolutely adore. Once I talked to a guy and I said if I had my way, I would want a show that was tonal love forward and nothing before tonal love. And my friend said, and I would take a show that was the river and before
isn't
totally.
it about, though, obviously it's about the listener, and the split we're talking here from Tunnel of
Yeah.
Love on is post therapy, Bruce. It's the writer who's had therapy and is self
Yeah.
reflective, and his language changes. He either has to write in the third person about other people in great kind of Hemingway-esque detail, Tom Joad,
Yeah.
or he writes in a series of sort of metaphoric Jungian landscapes of.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the end of Beautiful Reward.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of large chunks of recent albums where the imagery is always universal. It works in certain ways. We josh him for returning to the same images, but those are universal images, and he deploys them consciously and knowingly and
Yeah.
cleverly well. And at the same time, this lets him protect, I suspect, a lot of his own private feelings, and he lets you have a peek here and there, but he does it now very carefully. He's curating his own image in a way that you can't really criticize him for, because he gave us everything in those early years, probably way too much.
So I never can remember who said this, and I apologize if you're listening and send me an email reminding me it was you who said it. But I had a guest on that said in 99 he was at the reunion tour. He was sitting in the pit, standing in the pit, in the middle of the show, and he said, "This is it. This is the band broke up. They're back together. This is the ultimate. This is the best it'll ever be." He said maybe they'll tour every few years, but this is the ultimate moment of my E Street Band fandom. And
Yeah.
he says, you want to tell that guy, you ain't seen nothing yet. Like, you're at halftime. Like, you have The Rising, Working on a Dream, Broadway, an autobiography, Letter to You, coming.
No, absolutely. And he's balanced, I think, very cleverly the second act of his career, where he's paid homage to the first bit, but also
Yeah,
insisted it's true.
yeah,
He's not writing out of compulsion, I suspect. Now he's writing because he wants to,
yeah,
and I think he's been hugely helped by Steve's curation of him as well.
yeah,
He's more and more inclined to say, "I played this to Steve," or "Steve said this," or there's that lovely moment in that what's that advertising fluff we had recently, Road Diary,
yeah.
where Steve says, "40 years too late, but I'm the MD."
And I always love Little Steven. Little Steven always has his tongue put firmly in his cheek when
Yeah,
he
well, they
talks
are,
about this.
and they've become the Bert and Ernie of rock and roll. Those two, it's lovely. But I
It
also,
is.
going back, I remember listening to Men Without Women at the same time as I listened to, I
Yeah,
think, Nebraska, and being it was I was more of a Stephen fan for 10 minutes than I was a Bruce fan. And then when Voice of America came out at the same time as Born in the USA, and I went to see Stephen with Josephine and Tim
yeah,
at the place called the Hammersmith Odeon. We didn't know Bruce had played there a few years before. Would return
yeah.
with the studio sessions. In fact, I spent this Christmas 3 weeks at the Hammersmith Odeon. It was a lovely kind of squaring of the circle. But we saw little Stephen there, and it was he was another guy. It was amazing. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Um,
Stole my mother's eyeliner and the Disciples of Soul coat.
absolutely. Do you've shared, I also think Tunnel of Love is a song is an album that you need to either have had your heart broken a couple of times or been in a long relationship to understand it as much. But then, of course, I had a 19-year-old tell me that it's his favorite album. What do I know?
Depends what scars you're carrying. Depends
Yeah.
what you've inherited and what you're bringing to that.
Yeah.
A different album post divorce.
Are there albums that you tend to go to follow up often?
Yeah, I think Western Stars is an absolute stone cold masterpiece. And I
Thank you
think,
for returning to that.
yeah, but I think it's because he is combining the things he's best at, which is writing stories, with another thing he's brilliant at, which is he's not really a rock and roll musician in many ways.
Yeah.
Love the fact that he's got this sort of Southern Californian Jimmy Webb, Glenn Campbell thing going on because I love Glenn Campbell and I've seen Jimmy Webb and
Yeah.
hear Bruce do that. He's a versatile musician. He can do it. And I think string arrangements, as Aniello, I think, does them are very good. Makes me wish he'd get off his ass and release the other Western Stars album that's sitting there because he's got another series, another 10, 12 songs, isn't he, from it?
Yeah.
And I think, I do not understand why the management or Sony or him, indeed him, because at the end of the day, it's him,
Yeah.
why they let that work sit there because the fan base, we're all, the people who are going to buy that stuff on
Yeah.
vinyl in 33 different forms. We're dying. We're dropping off the perch one by one.
Yeah.
I just don't understand why you'd hide it and why you wouldn't do the Dylan thing. Just throw it out there now because the legacy's secure. Let's see what you got because to hear another Western Stars now, your head would fall off. It's just
Yeah. And
fantastic.
yeah, I remember going, gosh, I just wish he would tour with it.
Yeah.
And then we got the next best thing, right? The film, which was just lovely. I've got family members that are not Bruce fans that will watch that. We went to the theater to watch it, and they came back going, "Oh my God, this was amazing. Where did this come from?"
Yeah. And
You
to
know?
think that that's sitting there. And
Yeah,
he's worried, I think, he's still, a bit of him still wants to be adored by 70,000 people. And I get that. I'm not sure he knows how well thought of and how received something like Western Stars is. My great friend Michael McKell, who's a singer and an actor, and he's another Bruce nut, say to me, listen, the guy can do anything. He's that good. If he decides to do an album of Gregorian chanting, he's probably going to do it very well.
yeah,
I think he still wants to be, there's still a bit of him that wants to be rock and roll and silly and
hmm
fun, and we get all that.
yeah,
My great sadness, and it is a sadness at this point rather than a frustration, is that he's not let some music out. And we've all listened to bootlegs of bits and bobs from the 70s and 80s, but nothing, of course, has leaked then, really. You occasionally get these bizarre little leaks of I'll Stand By You Always or something
yeah,
else that will squirrel its way out. And there's the
yeah,
Library of Congress stuff. Come on, just allow us to see that beautiful stuff that's just sitting there because it's not going to be, whatever it is, it ain't going to be bad.
yeah. But you and I are that way. And there's always the people that are just going to crap on anything. I remember someone when the Only the Strong came out. He's destroying his legacy. And I'm like, how? I just do not see at this point he's going to do any to destroy. You're all out of fucks to give, Bruce. Just put it
Yeah.
out there. And I do not care for the Seeger sessions,
Oh, see, I
but
love.
I figured why, and this is so silly. He didn't do Froggy Went a Courtin' the way my dad did it. So therefore, Bruce is wrong. And even that said, I love Pay Me My Money Down
Yeah,
and
they
Shannon
change
and other stuff,
something
right?
concert. That becomes something else.
Yeah. Is there any songs you're still chasing, Jay? Is there anything that live, which I was really sad he didn't throw out a Western Stars just every once in a while.
Yeah,
Tucson Train, Sleepy Joe Cafe. Just that would be perfect for the E Street Band. I'd take anything. Hello Sunshine,
yeah.
Western Stars. I'd love them.
Anything
Yeah,
off that, anything off Western
yeah,
Star. I would
Yeah.
still love to hear live "You'll Be Coming Down," which I think is a tremendously underestimated song.
Yeah. Okay.
Uh, my daughters went to the 2012 concert where he played the whole album in London, and I didn't, and they got that. But
Yeah.
yeah, but equally, there are songs I can never hear too many times. I think it should be mandatory on the ticket to get "Racing in the Street." But
Yeah.
yeah, I've been
Yeah.
lucky.
To me,
I've heard it. I've heard it a lot. Yeah.
yeah. And to me, like, I want Land of Hope and Dreams every time. I
I,
just adore that song.
I saw it in Dublin in May 23. Played with a local guy who was very ill and dying, and came out of the blue. It was one of those moments where you went, "Wow,
What do you think's going to come out in 2025? What do you think's going to come out later this year?
this is the great unknown, isn't it?"
Yes.
I'd like to think we're going to get whatever tracks two is going to be
Yeah.
manifested. I'd like to think we get it in one dump
Hmm.
of massive stuff.
Yeah.
Obviously, rumor now is it's 7 discs, so I'd
Yeah.
like to 60, 70, 80 songs, and it will be fun trying to digest that much music because it's tough enough to digest 12 tracks. But what, of course, I would like is a new album, but I suspect that we're not going to get that this year, aren't we? Who
Yeah.
knows what? Because there's all sorts of whispers about he's always writing, he's always recording,
Yeah.
and nobody knows. But I could probably do without another E Street Band album. I love another Devils and Dust style small group. The great unknown is the film. Are they going to release something off Electric Nebraska? What are they going to do for the film? I've just seen A Complete Unknown. I saw it last week
Yeah.
and absolutely loved it. And I read this, I've seen the script, as I'm sure you have, of Deliver Me from Nowhere.
Yeah.
The script is promising, but
Mhm.
quite how it manifests post edit and post production,
Yeah.
God only knows. And I suspect that's the great unknown. If it comes out well and they like it, are they going to release companion work to it? But if they do, I just hope that doesn't clog up the release schedule for tracks two and any new work, which is,
Yeah.
as always, is what you want.
Yeah. I was at Columbus last year and he played I'm Going Down. It's not one of my favorite songs. It turned out, though, that finished Born in the USA. Hearing that song that day mean I've heard everything on Born in the USA live.
Okay,
So I was like, okay, wow, I filled out the bingo card. Very
you got it.
nice. Before I get to the Mary question, any final thoughts, Jay?
I just think we should be incredibly grateful to have been alive at a time when somebody was at the pinnacle of this form and this work. And I think that's great. And we'll always remember him as a sort of great rock and roll performer. But I think his legacy will be in his writing.
Ah,
That's why I returned to the autobiography, to the spoken word stuff. And once he freed himself, understandably, of that dose of Morrisonitis and Dylanology that he had in the early years, found his voice through American literature and country music,
yeah,
you've ended up with a body of work that is quite exceptional. And I suspect his legacy will be as a songwriter, as a writer.
yeah,
And I'm not American. I don't necessarily share the same enfranchisement into his politics or the principles he stands up for, but I can recognize he's a great liberal voice from
yeah,
a true tradition of liberalism, and he will be seen, I think, as a writer that you categorize alongside, as he would probably have wanted, Steinbeck and
yeah,
people like Dos Passos, and also somebody who could do the hard-boiled stuff. There's a great parallel between the best of James N. Cain and some of those things on Nebraska. He'll be seen as a great writer of the 20th century, I think.
yeah. I know that, and I never can try to find it. Like I tried to find, and I can't do it. But years ago, someone for April Fool's Day did a fake news article that Bruce was a Pulitzer Prize winning writer. And they wrote a background of all his books and used the titles of the, and then changed. This was where Bruce did a collection of poetry, where he wrote a family saga. And I said, boy, I'd like to be in that universe.
I'll
If
tell
the,
you now,
if, yeah,
there's a thing you might like. I bought them on Etsy. You know that
yeah,
website for homemade.
yeah,
There are a series of prints where each of Bruce's albums are imagined as the spines of Penguin books.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and I've got Darkness and I've got Nebraska, and I think I've got one other. I've also got Leonard Cohen's greatest hits, and they're beautifully done, different kind of designs to the back of each.
Yeah.
And when you see particularly Darkness done as a series of book titles and spines, they really do seem like a literary work. Yeah, go on Etsy and look for Springsteen book prints.
I
They are
will
amazing.
do. So, before I get you out of here,
Yeah,
I end every podcast with the Mary question. So,
right.
to give a little background, Jay Armstrong was a honors English teacher in the Philadelphia area. He is now retired and is writing, and he has a new book out, actually. When he was teaching, by the way, the new book is You and 10 Other Gifts I'm Grateful For. He would give his students the lyrics to Thunder Road, and they would read it as if it was a poem, and then would ask his students the question, do you think Mary gets in the car at the end of the song? So, Jay, do you have an answer for that?
I think in 1975 she got in the car.
Yes.
I think through the 80s she probably wasn't too sure. Maybe
Right.
sometimes she did, sometimes she didn't. I don't think she got in it in the early noughties where he was singing in that twang because that wouldn't have sold it to anybody. And I think these days, yeah, she probably does for old time's sake. She gets a walking stick or maybe her frame out and toddles to the back of the car and they sit in it. They don't go anywhere, but they
Hmm.
just sit there for old time's sake now. So yeah, she does these days. But I think there
Nice.
were times when she didn't get in that car.
If someone wants to reach you, how can they?
The best way of reaching me is right now, these days, at the Tolthorpe, Toletthorpe, the Tolthorpe Shakespeare Festival. You have a little Google, you'll find it on there, and there's a generic email you can reach me for. So come and find me if you want to chat at the Tolthorpe Shakespeare Festival in England.
I was going to ask you real quick before I
Yeah.
let you go. It sounds like you've done different things of live, but it sounds like you have taken other forms and translated it to the stage. Is there something specific about that, or is that just where the gig was at the time?
No, there is. You've nailed me straight away there. You, in a sentence, nailed me. I think that's always been my passion, but I've always wanted to spread the gospel, whether it's of Bruce or of a
Hmm.
great piece of work in any form. And I love mashing things together. That's why I learned through Bruce. You could bring in these influences, and I remember many times I've slipped in musical soundtracks to Shakespeare or other pieces of work that were
Hmm.
completely field, occasionally a bit of Bruce, very rarely a bit of Bruce. But I think that the division between art forms into high and low is generally a bit false. There's only, to paraphrase Louis Armstrong, two sorts of art. There's good art and there's bad art. If I have to explain the difference, you never know. So,
Yeah.
you know, I'm a pluralist. Bring things in together, mash them up, change the form. Forms are elastic, and like Shakespeare, good work will survive anything. You're going to make work which cannot be denied, to quote the master. And that's what, in our own humble little way, I think everyone is striving to do.
One of the things that he said, there's only one show business. And he said, whether you're the guy dressed up as the mascot on the side of the professional game, or you're an actor, or he says it's all show business. You're
Yeah,
just all doing something different.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Couldn't
you
agree.
are. This was so much fun. Let's do it again sometime, okay, Jay?
I've really enjoyed it, Jesse.
Good. I'm glad you had fun. All right, listeners, go check it out. Reach out, let Jay know how much you enjoyed hearing him. I would love to hear you guys give me thoughts about what's going on. But for now, everyone be safe, be kind, and we'll talk soon. Bye.